Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson is founder of the Rainbow Push Coalition and one of the major political and civil rights figures of our time. He has been an aide to Martin Luther King and candidate for President of the United States. Reverend Jackson has long been interested in issues around education, employment, and social justice. Welcome.
To you, sir.
Thank you very much for coming. And if we could start by talking about some of the current initiatives that you're working on in terms of education, if you wouldn't mind saying a word or two about that.
You know, perhaps, and thank you very much for allowing me to share with you and the audience, perhaps the greatest initiative we could engage in today, the greatest green movement act would be student loan debt forgiveness as a stimulus to our economy. So many youth who are bright and able students will not apply. They can't afford it. They're in school, they must come out, they can't afford to stay there. They graduate guaranteed debt without a guaranteed job. And so you have all these disincentives to get an education. And right now, student loan debt is greater than credit card debt and rising. That's because we've subjected education to quote unquote blind market forces. Education should be seen as a national investment and a public service whose returns are predictable and substantial. And so I'm convinced that our big initiative now is to fight for student loan debt forgiveness. We bail out banks, literally forgave them, not linked to lending, not to reinvestment. And these banks were getting zero interest money,
Right.
charging students 7%. They were making a fee off of free money. We challenged those priorities.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that, as you well know, and you've been encouraging. What do you think about the issue of using more endowment funds from different universities to help pay down some of that instead of necessarily just forgiving it on a national level?
Well, wherever some schools that can afford that ought to do it, but for the broad base of America's youth, we need to appreciate just the impact of education. I mean, strong minds break strong chains. It is the way to unleash teachers in our society. We need more teachers and more coaches and fewer jail wardens and fewer police, for example. We go forward by teachers who teach and students who learn. We go forward by teachers and coaches as opposed to more police and more jail wardens, which is the kind of the reaction as opposed to going in the other direction. And so that is why it seems to me that for that vast body of youth, it means high education is impacted by low education.
Right.
Prenatal care, Head Start, and daycare on the front side rather than jail care and welfare on the back side. And we seem to be far more committed at this point to building more jails as a form of security than educating more students. And schools cost so much less with such a greater result.
Well, what do you think we should be doing in terms of encouraging more students to go into education besides just the issue of the cost? Because clearly we have an issue in terms of dropout rates, we have issues in terms of access more generally. What do you think we should be doing as an educational country?
Well, if you're looking off at the laying off of teachers, why would you go into a profession where you're meeting teachers coming this way as opposed to school doors opening going in that way? And that is certainly a misplaced priority. We have a debt crisis, and rather than having some fair distribution of burden and responsibility, we are somehow scapegoating teachers and teachers' demands and teachers' seniority and teachers' pensions as a cause for the economic crisis. I am astonished at how we have literally brainwashed many Americans to believe if you just got rid of those teachers, life would be better. The fact of the matter is that where is the money? I mean, 1.2 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that number is rising with interest on it. And now $1 billion plus in Libya, and we keep on moving. Where is the money? The top 5 oil companies have made $1 trillion since 9/11, and they're still getting subsidy. And guess what? And not only getting subsidy, they're manipulating the price of gas up when there's no shortage. Where is the money? We bail out the banks. They now have $2 trillion in cash, don't know where to spend it. Where's the money? The huge Bush tax break extension at Christmas time, where for 10 years they got another $1 trillion, and we're laying off teachers. And to me, those priorities do not bode well for our future, and those priorities must be challenged. There is more money in the first 2 years of the Bush tax break extension. It's around $150 billion that will go to America's richest people. That's about the same amount as all the state budget deficits combined. That's what we need to reorder priorities, not just refortify the old system. We need, in fact, a system of new priorities.
But would you say, if I'm hearing you correctly, that you're proposing that we take some of the money from the military budget and use that money to hire more teachers?
Well, the military budget, to be sure, because it does not correspond with national security needs. I mean, a bigger budget does not mean more security, for example. But I'm saying more than that the military has their role to play, but why would you bail out banks or who by the sheer weight of their own greed and lack of oversight put us in a hole, bail them out, and none of them pay a price for the greed and the recklessness, and not link it to lending and the reinvestment? The result is we've lost 7 million homes in foreclosure, now another 4 million projected. So they paid no price. They made money off the subprime lending scheme. They made money off of originating the loans. They made money off of the private mortgage investment. I mean, and every way they just kept making money, the government kept feeding them. So I'm saying that kind of bank of money. Then 59 million Americans now have no health insurance, 59 million. And the insurance rates are rising because there's no cap, no public option on insurance. So the rich Americans have gotten much richer the last few years. So you have wealth and war up top and poor at the bottom, and a shrinking middle class where we're outsourcing jobs and insourcing content. The American worker is catching hell in this arrangement.
Well, in terms of the way that America's moving, I mean, I think you raise a fair point. But as you probably know, and you well know, not everybody always necessarily agrees with all of your ideas. And what I was wondering is, on an education context,
you don't have to agree, just the facts, sir. Many of our youth cannot afford to go to college.
No, you're absolutely right. But I was going to ask you about the issue of how we use our universities to kind of engage in civil dialogue about different perspectives on public policy issues.
One thing that students can do, we've just been in a major struggle in the University of Wisconsin system, and they're laying off teachers and raising tuition costs and lowering Pell Grants. But all those students, 180,000, are eligible to register and vote. They are now a political force. If they assume that power, they are the difference in all state elections. For Senate, for governor, they have their power. For too many of them, have delayed the use of that power. When we fought for the right to vote in 1965, it was, not only Steve blacks could not vote, but white women couldn't serve on many southern juries. Farmers who couldn't pay poll taxes couldn't vote. 18-year-olds couldn't vote. Students could not vote. Residents where they attend school, you could not vote bilingually. We brought all those barriers down, but one of which is the right to vote where you attend school. If students use that political power, that power alone would change priorities. So we have, there's a residue of power I think students are not using.
Well, do you think that students should be more political than they are?
They have to. I've gone to many colleges and universities and asked, how many of you own some form of student aid? And about half the hands go up.
Sure. I
said, all of you own aid. This is a state university, as the case may be. And so they must be more political to be politically aware, because you're in the system from womb to tomb, from a high infant mortality rate, the short life expectancy, and everything in between. But in the process, we must become more astute and more active, more functional in using that power to make things happen. When I was in Wisconsin campaigning a few weeks ago, there are 80,000 high school seniors who are 18 eligible to vote right now. I went to 2 high schools, and all 300 seniors registered. And of course, that inspired 125 faculty and staff to register. Right. About 500 people in one place with the power to determine the winner of the elections. And so we've not used that power to the interest of those who now have that power.
But do you think, and if you don't mind me pressing you on this a little bit, I mean, do you think that it would be in America's interest to have universities as political as the University of Wisconsin system? If you look at universities around the world, particularly in a lot of places throughout the world, the universities don't function anywhere near as well as ours do, and they're far more political, with a lot more activism, a lot more closures of the universities. Do you think that would be helpful?
Well, closing universities is a tactic that's an extreme measure when you cannot be heard. But the changes that we now realize came from student activism. When Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, he was still in grad school and a pastor of church in Montgomery, Alabama. In 1957, the students at Little Rock made a judgment to test the outer limits of segregation. It forced the hand of everybody, and the National Guard had to be brought in, or deputized, as the case may have been. We now have a public accommodation bill because students came alive and took the risk. I was jailed along with 8 students in 1960 trying to use the public library. Students led the drive for the March on Washington. Many of us were in jail the day of that speech. In 65, the Voting Rights Act. So when students come alive, they have the youth, the energy, the power to reshape or shape the world that they want to live in.
But do you think that it's necessarily a good thing that the students are leading the direction for some of those things that you're talking about? And I realize, you obviously are one of the great political leaders of our time, but not everybody is necessarily involved in such important matters as you've been in your life.
There's no future in detachment. There's no future in hopelessness. There's no future in surrender, spiritual. My point is, if you vote your interest, if you have an interest in reducing tuition, vote about it. If you have an interest in student loan debt forgiveness, then fight for it, vote about it. If you have an interest in more Pell Grants, then, because all these are political decisions. Tuition costs, where you're now driven by market forces as opposed to what education costs, you're driven by schools competing as to who can pay the cost the most because it keeps them leverage. I mean, the foolishness of that, So if your interest is in student loan debt forgiveness and reducing Pell Grants, if your interest is in more access to education, then you ought to vote about that. Because you come out of school now with having gone through the credit card crisis, trying to maneuver your way through with a lower credit score, a degree, and no job. It makes the pursuit somewhat futile. It takes away the motivation to pursue it. And so these are the things the students, I think, must prioritize.
And what about students who are interested in in not the humanities and not the social sciences? For instance, the students interested in the natural sciences, our chemists, our physicists. What advice would you have for them?
Well, you may be a chemist or a physicist or a piano player. What about the cost of getting in school? What about the semester cost every time the semester rolls around? So no one can be oblivious to the cost of education, and the cost is taking us further and further away from sometimes our most able students, maybe our poorest. And so the poorest have more access to the military, the richest have more access to the universities, and that does not bode well for our democracy. Some kill and die for the democracy and some study in it. And it seems to me there must be some shared burden of military service, some shared burden of access to college and universities.
And do you support the efforts that we've been making to help more veterans enroll in higher education?
Of course, there's something shameful about the number. Half of all homeless men are veterans. Increasingly, homeless women who are veterans. And we love soldiers. We don't love veterans so much, it seems. And many of them have caps, like 5-year caps, when they can get resources when they come out of the military, though their lives have been interrupted, and they've lived in danger, often who never mentally recovered. Of the million who've gone to Afghanistan and Iraq, about 500,000 have gone in some form of disability because of just the shock and awe value of war and death and killing and being shot at and destruction. They need help. There's nothing to me more pathetic than to go to a given military base. You have to drive through a whole slew of payday lenders and others who in fact use the leverage of soldiers who are, I know several soldiers who are in the war facing home foreclosure back home, whose spouse is barely making it, having to hustle along to make it payday to payday. We should not treat those who take the most risk without the opportunity that goes with that.
And do you think then that we should be, as a country then, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that you think that we should forgive the debts of students and that we should, and I wasn't clear whether or not you were also saying that we should increase the amount of support that we're giving for universities generally.
Of course we should. You know that the veterans, for example, should have they should not be in Afghanistan facing home foreclosure. And so some plan to forgive them, as we forgave the banks, I might add. We took rather easily the pill, forgive the most greedy and the most exploitative, but then when it comes to bailing out veterans, we seem to get a lump in our throat. But those who are paying that price should not be in foxholes, as it were, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and in the economic hole back home. And so, yes, I think that the banks should have an initiative for veteran, certainly big reduction, a home debt reduction of forgiveness. And also the same is true with veterans having easier access to higher education. We once had something called the National Education Defense Act. And all of that came from very brilliant people who had all the right abilities, and with easy access to college became great citizens and great leaders.
Fair enough. If I can ask you a slightly different question, and you may not want to go back this far in your history about Sesame Street, but you may remember that poem that you wrote. Would you tell us a little bit about that poem? Because I think a lot of people in the education world would be interested in the history behind that.
You know, I am somebody, but it was not written as a poem per se. Here's really what happened. Dr. King was killed April the 4th, 1968. And there was a great sadness, lots of pain. And we determined we would not let one bullet kill a whole movement. So led by Reverend Abernathy, we came on to Washington and set up something called Resurrection City. And while there in this makeshift city to expose the need for a multiracial, multicultural movement to fight poverty at home and not just war abroad, we set up there. And then while trying to adjust to that, June 5th, Robert Kennedy was killed. Reverend Abernathy had asked me to become the mayor of Resurrection City. So each morning I would gather people in our little town down near Lincoln Memorial. And on this day it was raining. We seemed so friendless, so much abounding despair. The White House did no longer have to pay us attention. Dr. King, Kennedy was gone. And so they looked up at me, and I had no money to give them. I had no bus ticket to give them to get back home. And I had read a book by Dr. Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited, which says when you're down to your irreducible essence and there's nothing left, you're still a somebody, naked against the world, that you matter. And so I said, I am somebody. Right. Respect me, protect me, never neglect me. I am somebody. My mind is a pearl. I can learn anything in the world. I am somebody. I may be unemployed, I may be unskilled, but I am somebody. And then my mind can conceive it, my heart believe it, I can achieve it, because I am somebody. And we went on to expand, down with dope, up with hope, keep up alive. But it grew out of a situation. And frankly, I never saw it as a poem. It's now projected as such. It really was just a kind of rally to lift up people's down head whose spirits had been broken.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. In terms of religion and education, what do you think is the proper intersection of the two?
Well, religion should inspire us to be better, to have within us a sense of that we are pilgrims of a global journey, not just some private political scheme, that we're part of all of humanity because God is, as it were. And so religion, we live in our faith, we live under the law. People of faith ought to pursue an education, ought to use their education and their faith to lead and to knock down barriers and to open closed doors. That's what people of faith, and they should not use faith to lock people out. Use faith to let people in. They should see big tent. Faith, if it's faith in God, not just faith in country, not just faith in your race, then that religion allows us to see the world through a door, not through a keyhole. So religion gives us a sense of divinity, a sense of inner security, and it should make us, therefore, better people, not narrower people.
And do you think that we as a society should treat religious universities the same as we treat non-religious universities?
We should treat them the same, but the funding should be different. And that's where, state universities have a different funding mechanism, because so long as some religious institutions remain limited to that particular religion, it locks out others. Well, then, if you're getting the money from the big pot,
right,
access should go to the big pot. You cannot take the big pot money for narrow purposes or for narrow ideology. And to that extent, we should have a sense of our religion. But if you could not fund a religious institution that segregates based upon race, based upon gender, you cannot use public funds to fund that narrow focus religious institution.
What about lower schools? How do you feel about high schools that are religiously based?
Well, we have some good examples of where some priests and ministers have been able to inspire students with a sense of religious doctrine and discipline. But again, in those instances, you cannot use public money for private purposes to that extent. And if that curriculum is open and the admission is open and the faculty jobs are open, then that makes it a rather public domain. Well, this public money should go for public purposes.
Do you think that we should spend more money in terms of helping students do community service projects, perhaps in exchange for forgiving some debt?
Oh, that would be a great thing. I mean, it's like war zone pay. If you're in the war zone, you get more money than if you're not in the war zone. I was looking at this $100 million, the gift that went to Newark, for example, for the schools. If it just goes to academics and training, what's missed is if a portion of that money went to teachers who live in the community, because when teachers are next to neighbors, they have a different rapport with parents, for example, and ministers. If a portion of that money went to getting the parents a job, because children whose parents have a job are different than children whose parents are unemployed. And in communities, if police, teachers, and firemen have to live in the community, and they're part of the shopping, the sharing, the education domain, different than teachers who kind of come in early and swoop back out,
right.
Police who lock up and then go away. So it's all about building community.
And would you encourage people to, all of what we know right now in the world, the way the world exists right now, would you encourage a young person right now on a campus to go into teaching?
Absolutely. We need teachers. The disincentive, however, is that they are looking at teachers being fired, laid off by the thousands, as if we don't need more teachers when we need more teachers. You tend to go to where there's an open market, where there's growth. And right now we are firing teachers and hiring police. We're firing coaches and hiring jail wardens. The result is too often first-class jails and second-class schools. That must be reversed. And the biggest union in California is the jail wardens union. It's bigger than the teachers union because there's a plan to lock up rather than a plan to lift up. And so these, to me, are the values priorities that we today must address.
Fair enough. And in terms of your advice for students, there are a lot of students who watch this show. We are at the University of the District of Columbia. There are a lot of parents of students who watch this show. What advice do you have for them?
Take learning seriously. You have the option to do less than your best. But less than your best is a sin. And the wages of sin is death. Those who've made the great impact have had to develop sharp, critical thinking minds. Dr. King at age 14 was doing an essay on the Negro and the Constitution at age 14 in an essay. He finished high school at 15. He finished college at 19. He finished seminary at 22. He has PhD at 26. And so for him, middle age was 19 and a half. He was killed at 39. So strong minds break strong chains. Those whose impact lasts. Du Bois is getting his PhD at Harvard in 1896. Those whose impact lasts. President Barack Obama is simply smart. He's intellectually capable. He has the capacity to see the big world. So his background education, his parents' commitment to education, his work at Columbia, his work at Harvard gives him the academic credentials to see, think, and adjust to the bigger world. So I would say students today, whatever you pursue, whether it's physics, or chemistry, or music, or art, or literature, take learning seriously. When you're in your formative years, you have nothing better to do than now to pursue education development with a passion.
Fair enough. And what about people, oh, we're almost done, one more question. The question about students whose parents are interested in education. What about their parents? Do you have advice for their parents? Do you encourage them to go back to school? People who are perhaps in their 40s and 50s. Because we see a lot more students of that age around the country.
And the beauty of my mother-in-law, my wife, Jackie's mother, she had 4 children before she was 20, a very young mother. And she moved from Florida to Virginia, began to work at the veteran school at night, determined for her children to get a college education. That was her obsession. She got all of them through college. At age 53, she got her GED. And then she kept going while working at the community college at night, Nelson Junior College. By age 63, she got her degree at Hampton. The next year, she got her master's at Norfolk State. She was determined to get an education because that pursuit has changed her world. It moves you from superstition to science. Education opens up your mind and allows you to grow into bigger realms of appreciation. I think about Judge Mathis, the TV judge. I first met Judge Mathis. He was in jail. He was incarcerated. I did not know him. He was one of the youth. You're in jail, you misstepped, or you got hijacked, as the case may be. But in a hole, you need a rope, not a shovel. Come out of here and don't go back. Don't be a part of the recidivism flow. And so he got the message. Other than that, and then he finished his jail term. He never got his high school diploma. He got his GED. He then went to college. He did well. He got married, stable family, still the same family. He went to law school, did well. Came in, he couldn't practice because he'd been a felon. We worked real hard, and he finally got the breakthrough. And at the popularity of a young man with all these abilities and all these skills and couldn't practice, he won the lawsuit. He became a popular youngest judge in the history of Michigan. So from jail to judgeship is Greg Mathis's journey of excellence. So you see people like this. In some sense, Judge Mathis and my mother-in-law, they've shown us how. And it's never too late to learn. We should always have this thirst for education. And I must say to you, my grandmother, who the last of 13 children, didn't even have a birth certificate. Couldn't read, couldn't write. She only marked an X for her name. But she had the passion for education. And she saw it through me. She would work for the Waldrops. And when and their children would throw away the books, National Geographic magazine and the like, she couldn't read them. But she'd know if they read them, I should read them. She would bring their books home that they threw away in the garbage can, so I could read them and expand my world, so that one can have a desire for education, no matter what one's status may be. What is my mother-in-law, with her determination to educate her children, she saw beyond herself. My grandmother, who couldn't read and write, but wanted me to read the same thing the children read that she worked for. Well, Judge Mathis in his journey from jail to judgeship. This thirst for more knowledge, for more education, and less ignorance, this thirst for more science and less superstition must be constantly whetted in our appetite.
And we appreciate your advice. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
If you would like additional information about Reverend Jackson's current work, please visit the Rainbow Push website at rainbowpush.org. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today. Reverend, thank you very much.